Hello everyone, welcome to Prince Civil Services, a visionary program of Prince EduHub Seeker. This program is visionary in the sense that we here at Prince Civil Services give the 12th pass out students a unique opportunity to prepare for civil services along with college. We believe in making the foundation strong. For that reason, we start with NCRTs and later on with advanced level knowledge. So, a student at Prince Civil Services would go through different levels of learning from basic to advanced learning along with personality development so that after he completes the college, he can fight the exam and clear the exam in the first attempt itself. So, it's a humble request to everyone watching this video to spread this visionary idea to all the relevant aspirants so that they can benefit from this program at the maximum. Now, we here in this session are going to discuss the UPSC Civil Services Prelims Examination Paper 2021, and today we are going to discuss the environment and ecology session, and the other parts would be discussed by the other experts. Now, you might find some of the questions in this session included in science or in geography because environment and ecology is part of science also and part of geography also. But even if they are discussed there, we would have a different perspective, that is the environmental or ecological perspective to that question. All right. So let's start. See, UPSC has conducted prelims examination 2021. We are all aware of it. Plus, I would say the paper was, some questions were easy, some were moderate, and some were tricky questions. All right. So today in this session, we are going to discuss in all 21 questions under the subject environment and ecology. All right. So let's start the session with our first question. As you can see on the screen, R2 Code of Practices constitutes a tool available for promoting the adoption of. We have 4 options here. Environmentally responsible practices in electronics recycling industry. B. Ecological management of wetlands of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. C. Sustainable practices in the cultivation of agricultural crops in degraded lands. D. Environmental impact assessment in the exploitation of natural resources. Now, if the aspirant has read the newspaper and has been in touch with the current affairs, then you might easily pick the right choice. So first, you need to know that what is R2. R2 stands for responsible recycling. R2 stands for responsible recycling and is a standard specifically created for the electronics recycling industry by Sustainable Electronics Recycling International, that is SERI. SERI is an organization, international organization, and it has come up with the R2 standards. All right, these are the standards specifically for electronics recycling industry. All right, so our correct option would be A. Environmentally responsible practices in electronics recycling industry. Now let's move on to the next question. Now, why is there a concern about copper smelting plants? Now we have 3 points here and we have to relate it with the copper smelting plants. Now let's see first what are the statements. The first statement, they may release lethal quantities of carbon monoxide into environment. Second statement is copper slag can cause the leaching of some heavy metals into environment. And the third is they may release sulfur dioxide as pollutant. Now, if we see the statements, all right, first you should know what is smelting. Smelting is a metallurgical process under which we extract the base metal from the ore. So here we are talking about copper smelting plants. All right, that means we are extracting copper out of it. Let's see the first statement. Now they may release lethal quantities of carbon monoxide. Actually, in smelting process, carbon monoxide acts as a reducing agent. So smelting is actually the extraction of the metal by the use of heat and a reducing agent. So actually this carbon monoxide actually acts as reducing agent. So this is the basic reaction for it. You can see that carbon ore, that is the carbon oxide plus the carbon monoxide, it releases the carbon dioxide and we get the base metal. So actually the carbon monoxide is not released, it is actually utilized. All right, and what is released? Carbon dioxide. So the first statement is wrong. We actually use coke and charcoal for this purpose. All right, so that carbon monoxide is released and it reduces the ore. That is, ore is what? It is the oxides of the base metals. All right, so we get the copper here. So the first statement is wrong. If the first statement is wrong, if we see the options, then we can, by elimination method, we can easily find out what is the right choice, because 3 choices are eliminated. We are left with only 1 choice, that is B. That is, second and third statement are correct. So this was a very easy, I would say, a easy question. If you know what is smelting process, then you can easily attempt this question and you can get the correct answer. So then also we'll read the second and third statement. The copper slag can cause the leaching of some heavy metals into environment. Yes, some heavy metals like tin, lead, cobalt, they are part of this ore and they are released during the smelting process into the environment and they can be leached into the environment. So this is correct. Third statement, they may release sulfur dioxide as pollutants. Yes, because the ore also contains some quantity of sulfur, and during this process of smelting, sulfur is released in the form of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere, and sulfur dioxide is actually a pollutant. So the third statement is correct. Let's see. Generally this smelting process is done in a blast furnace. You can see, you can pause the video and see the diagram. All right, and here we apply the ore and you can see the coke. This is the source for carbon monoxide, the reducing agent. So coke also acts as a reducing agent for the ore. All right, let's move on to the next question. Which one of the following is a filter feeder? Filter feeder, right? The options are catfish, octopus, oyster, or pelican. Now, first of all, you should know what is a filter feeder. To attempt this question, you should know what is filter feeder. Now, there are some organisms, all right, and this is basically related to aquatic organisms. This is related to aquatic organisms. Filter feeder, but not restricted to aquatic organisms, because some of the organisms, they are not aquatic, like flamingos. Flamingos are also filter feeder. So what is filter feeder? First understand this. Actually, they take up the water. They take up the water, all right, and they filter. They have some specialized organ for it. They filter the water, and whatever impurities or whatever the particulate matter is suspended in the water, they actually capture that and they let out the clean water. So they have a membrane, a filament of membrane. Generally the sharks and whales, they are filter feeders. So they generally take up the water and they filter the water. They take up all the particulate matter containing small organisms, or might contain some organic matter and inorganic matter. They filter that, they keep that, and they release the water, and then they use this particulate matter containing organic and inorganic material as food. So this is the basic concept behind filter feeder. Now, to understand which is among which, now you know what is filter feeders. Now easily we can see that which, now this was a tricky question. You must know what is filter feeder, plus you should know what are the examples for it. The correct answer is oyster. Also, it is a very common thing because generally oysters, if you keep it in a fish tank, in a dirty fish tank, it would clean up the fish tank because it is a filter feeder. It takes up all the dirty water and gives out the clean water. You can see here, you can see in this diagram, it takes up oxygen and suspended particles and gives out clean water. Also, whales and shark are filter feeders. Along with that, you can see this flamingo. Flamingos are also filter feeders. All right. Now let's move on to the next question. Now let's discuss the next question. In case of which of the following biogeochemical cycles, the withering of rocks is the main source of release of nutrient to enter the cycle? We have four options: carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, and sulfur cycle. So first of all, we have to understand what is biogeochemical cycles. Biogeochemical cycle means bio, that is life is involved, geo, that is earth is involved, and chemical, that means chemical reactions are involved. These are complex cycles. All right. Now understand this. The earth receives energy from sun. The basic source of energy for earth is sun. This energy is released in the form of heat. Rest all materials, they travel in a closed loop or a closed cycle. Now we can divide and those cycles are termed as biogeochemical cycles. Now we can classify biogeochemical cycles into two types. One is gaseous. As we can see these two examples, this is gaseous cycles, and sedimentary. These two are examples of sedimentary. So basically the confusion was between C and D. Students might have faced the confusion between C and D because carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle, these are gaseous cycle. That means the atmosphere is involved in it. Basically, the atmosphere is the prime source. You can see carbon dioxide. All right. Let's see the cycles first. All right. Let's see. All right. If we see the phosphorus cycle, the steps are withering of rocks, absorption by the plants, absorption by animals, and then return to the environment through decomposition. All right. So we can see it starts with the Earth's crust. It starts in the Earth's crust. See, the phosphorus cycle starts in the Earth's crust as phosphorus is found in the rocks in abundance. So we can get the answer correctly from phosphorus. The correct answer is phosphorus cycle. But let's see, you can pause the video and see the cycle here. All right, how the phosphorus travels in this cycle. All right, you can see the carbon cycle. As we have discussed, it's a gaseous cycle. So basically CO2 travels. All right, it can travel in the form of organic matter and inorganic matter as well. All right, because carbon is present in every living form. So generally photosynthesis is involved, which in photosynthesis it takes up the carbon dioxide and produces food and releases oxygen. All right, and animal respiration, in animal respiration we take up the oxygen and release carbon dioxide. All right, and also when the living beings or living organisms, plants and animals, they die, then through decomposition some of the carbon is given back to the environment and some become part of fossil fuels. All right, this is carbon cycle, but we can see no withering of rocks is involved in here in a major source, because what the question is asking is the withering of rocks is the prime source for that element to be released in the cycle. Now if you see the nitrogen cycle, it is also a gaseous cycle. So basically the nitrogen present in the atmosphere is converted through nitrogen fixation into ammonia, and that ammonia later on is converted into nitrites and nitrates, and later on again into ammonia, and then inert nitrogen gas, and then again. This is the whole cycle. If we talk about sulfur, now the confusion was with sulfur, but sulfur also, you can see the withering of rocks is a source for sulfur, but not the prime source. The question is asking the prime source, because the other sources are vulcanization, all right. Volcanoes, they also release sulfur dioxide. Also, the sulfur present in the atmosphere in the form of sulfur dioxide is brought down through rain and precipitation on the surface, all right. And later on, the whole cycle, it goes on, all right. So we can see that withering of rocks is not the prime source. We have seen the sulfur cycle, that it starts with withering. The phosphorus cycle, the phosphorus cycle, it starts with the withering of the rocks. So our correct answer is C, phosphorus cycle. Now let's move on to the next question. So as you can see on the screen, which of the following are detritivores? Five organisms are listed: earthworm, jellyfish, millipedes, seahorses, and woodlice. Now, which of them are detritivores? First of all, we should know what are detritivores. Detritivores are the organisms which feed on dead organic matters. So the organisms which feed on the dead organic matters are termed as detritivores. So let's see from the options, and we'll use the elimination method. Whenever such question comes, when many of the options are there or many of the statements are there, generally it is best to use the elimination method. That saves your time, plus you get the correct answer easily. Let's see the earthworm. Basically, the earthworm is a detrivore. It is termed as a friend of farmers because basically it cleans up all the organic matter like leaves and dead animals. It thrives on the dead organic matter. So this is detrivores. This is a detrivore. All right, correct. So let's see the option. All right, the option B is eliminated because one is not present there. Now let's move on to this next one, jellyfish. Jellyfish is an aquatic animal. Plus, if you see the diagram, you would easily understand. See, this is jellyfish. Basically, it is an aquatic animal, and plus it is termed as carnivore. It is a carnivore organism. So it depends, it kills its prey and eats it. So this is not termed as detrivore because detritivore thrives on dead organisms or dead organic matter. But here, carnivores are different from them because they kill their prey and then eat it. All right. So it is termed as a carnivore. So jellyfish is not a detritivore. So if we take out two, we get the correct answer here. We get the correct answer C. So if you apply elimination method in such questions, you would arrive to the answer quickly. That would save your time in the examination. Let's discuss the other organisms as well. Millipedes. Millipedes, you can see the diagram and relate it because you must have seen this organisms in your backyard or in the garden or somewhere. You might have seen this organisms with so many legs. This is termed as millipede and it is a detritivore. It is a detritivore. Now next is a seahorse. Let's see the seahorse. It is an aquatic animal. Also it is carnivore. Some of the seahorses are not carnivores, but maximum generally they are carnivores. All right. And the woodlice. This is a woodlice. Generally you can find it in soil or near the trees and all. This is a woodlice. It thrives on the dead organic matter. Generally the leaves and the dead organisms, it thrives on them. It is also a detritivore. So the correct answer is we got seahorse out of it. So earthworms, millipedes, and woodlice. These are the detritivores. All right. Let's move on to the next question. Now, the common carbon metric supported by UNEP has been developed for A. Assessing the carbon footprint of building operations around the world. B. Enabling commercial farming entities around the world to enter carbon emission trading. C. Enabling governments to assess the overall carbon footprint caused by their countries. D. Assessing the overall carbon footprint caused by the use of fossil fuels by the world in a unit time. Now, this is also a current affair question based on ecology and environment. See, the common carbon metric. First of all, you should understand what is carbon footprint. So generally it is talking about carbon footprint in two options. Actually, what is carbon footprint? Carbon footprint means that during a process, how much greenhouse gases have been released in the environment through a process or through that entity, then that is termed as the carbon footprint of that process or that entity. All right. So common carbon metric supported by UNEP, it actually determines the carbon footprint of building operations around the world. All right. So the correct answer is A. Assessing the carbon footprint of building operations around the world. So measuring the energy use and reporting the greenhouse gas emissions from building operations. This is the work of common carbon metric. All right, it's a standard and it is developed by UNEP. All right, UNEP's CBCI, that is Sustainable Building and Climate Initiative. All right, let's move on to the next question. Now, which of the following have species that can establish symbiotic relationship with other organisms? We have three organisms here: cnidarians, fungi, protozoa. All right. First of all, to solve this question, you should understand what is symbiotic relationship. What is symbiotic relationship? See, in nature, many of the organisms, many of the species of organisms, they come across each other depending upon, like, they have common habitat or common food source or a common area to live in, like the common habitat. So at that time they interact with each other. Now that interaction can be of 5 types. It can be mutualism or commensalism, predation, parasitism, or competition. Let's understand one by one what is mutualism. So in mutualism, both the organisms are benefited by that relationship. If both the organisms are benefited by that relationship, then that relationship is termed as mutualism. Now, what is commensalism? In commensalism, one organism benefits from that relationship and the other organism is neutral, is unaffected, is not affected by that relationship. All right, then it would be termed as commensalism. All right, commensalism, you can see the example of shark and starfish. So starfish, it gets attached to the shark, and whenever the shark eats the other fish, the remains, the small remains, it thrives on the small remains, the starfish. It does not harm the shark, but it gets the food source because of the shark. So here the starfish is benefited and the shark is neutral. So this is an example of commensalism. Let's see predation. What is predation? In predation, one is benefited and the other is harmed. So predation, in which an organism kills the other organism. Like tiger, it kills the goat or the other herbivorous animals. So here it is an example of predation. The one is benefited, the lion is benefited, but the goat, it doesn't benefit. All right, so it is harmed. Now parasitism, in this also one organism is benefited and the other organism is harmed. But that's a difference between predation and parasitism, because in predation the organism kills the other organism. In parasitism, the organism which is benefited does not kill the host. It stays on the host and survives or thrives on the host. So the host acts as a food source. All right. This is the difference between predation and parasitism. Then competition. In competition, both the organisms are harmed or not benefited by the relationship. All right, they are not benefited, actually they are harmed. All right, so if two organisms have a common habitat, then that would be negative, because their population cannot thrive because they have a common habitat to live in. All right, they have shortage of space, so there would be a competition for space. Or if there is a common food source for two species of organisms, in that case also there would be competition. That relationship would be competitive because they have to compete for the common food source. All right, now understanding these 5 symbiotic relationship, now let's move on and see one by one the options or the statements. So first was cnidarians. Now basically cnidarians is a group of organisms in which corals, jellyfish and hydras etc. are included. So we know that corals live in a symbiotic relationship with an algae known as zooxanthellae. So corals and zooxanthellae, they live in a symbiotic relationship. Actually zooxanthellae is an algae and corals are actually animals, comes under animal kingdom, coral polyps. So basically here it's a symbiotic relationship, you can see. All right, so coral, what does coral does? Coral provides the protective environment for zooxanthellae. All right, a protective environment, plus the structure is determined by the corals. And what does zooxanthellae or the algae does? It provides the food source for the corals, and plus the color. We see the color of corals, it is determined by the zooxanthellae. Right, you must have come across a word coral bleaching. Generally what it is, in that the algae or the zooxanthellae, they leave this relationship and they leave the corals. All right, and when they leave, they take their color with them, because the color is because of zooxanthellae or the algae. All right, so in that case the corals, they get bleached. All right, it occurs due to stress. If the environment is stressful due to increase of temperature or impurities, in that case corals, they bleach. Now next is lichens. Now lichens are actually a combination of fungi and algae. Now here the fungi provides the structure for the algae, for the structure and a protective environment for the algae, and the algae provides the food source for the fungi. So basically the physical features of lichens are determined by fungi. It can be a new question, it can be asked in this way, that the lichens, they get their physical characteristics from fungi or algae. You should know it is due to fungi. All right, see the algae, you see the green parts here, this is algae. So algae is actually providing the food source, and the physical features is provided by fungi, and a protective environment is provided by the fungi. All right, so this is a mutualism. This is an example of mutualism, as well as the coral and the zooxanthellae, that was also an example of mutualism. Now the next option was protozoa. Actually protozoa has a symbiotic relationship with termites. So you can see on the board the termites are shown. Actually protozoa live in the guts of the termites. So what is the purpose, what is the work of termites? Termites provide food and protective environment to protozoa living in the guts of the termites. So they actually take up, they bite on the wood. All right, so wood contains cellulose. Now that cellulose is digested with the help of protozoa. So protozoa helps in the cellulose digestion for the termites. So this is a mutual relationship. All right, so let's come back to the question. Here you can see cnidarians, yes, it has a symbiotic relationship. Fungi, yes. Protozoa, yes. So our answer is D, 1, 2 and 3. All right, now let's move on to the next question. Now here two statements are given. All right, and this type of questions where they ask that is this second statement providing the correct explanation for the statement one? In that case, these questions have 2 points, that either it would be very easy. If either of the statement is wrong, it is so easy to attempt. But if both the statements are correct, there it gets a little bit tricky, and you have to use your basic knowledge to see that if it is actually explaining the other statement. Now let's see the two statements here. So the first statement says the United Nations Capital Development Fund and the Arbor Day Foundation has recently recognized Hyderabad as 2023 City of the World. It is directly taken from the current affairs. So it was announced, Hyderabad was announced as 2023 City of the World by Arbor Day Foundation and Food and Agriculture Organization of UN, not the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So this statement is actually wrong. It was a straightforward question from current affairs and an easy one, I must say. All right. So here, actually, in place of United Nations Capital Development Fund, the answer would be Food and Agriculture Organization. So Food and Agriculture Organization and Arbor Day Foundation, they collectively have recognized Hyderabad as 2023 City of the World. So the first statement is wrong. If we see at the options, so we can eliminate the two easily. All right, and the statement one is correct. No, it is not correct. So the correct answer would be D, without seeing the second statement. Though the second statement was also very easy. If we see, second statement says Hyderabad was selected for the recognition for a year following its commitment to grow and maintain the urban forest. If any aspirant has read this news, if he is aware of this fact, he would of course be aware of this fact also, because Hyderabad was included because it has promised to grow and maintain urban forest. All right. So the correct answer is D. The statement one is not correct, but statement two is correct. All right. Here you can see Hyderabad has become the only city in India to be recognized as a tree city of the world by Arbor Day Foundation and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Let's move on to the next question. As you can see on your screen, what is blue carbon? What is blue carbon? I must say this was an easy question, a straightforward question, a very basic question. Let's see the options. Carbon captured by oceans and coastal ecosystems. B. Carbon sequestered in forest biomass and agricultural soils. C. Carbon contained in petroleum and natural gas. D. Carbon present in atmosphere. So the blue carbon, it is not from current affairs, because this is very basic, that what is blue carbon. Blue carbon is actually carbon captured by the aquatic ecosystem, that is the oceans and coastal ecosystems. So the oceans and coastal ecosystems, they actually capture or sequester the carbon from the atmosphere, and they capture it. All right. And basically you can see the coastal ecosystem, mangroves are the best tree species to capture carbon. All right. Along with that, in the ocean and coastal areas, the carbon is captured, that is termed as blue carbon. All right. So I must say this was an easy question. Answer is A. Let's move on to the next question. So you can see, before that, let's see blue carbon, right? You can see the blue carbon, the coastal ecosystems of mangroves, tidal marshes, and sea grasses, meadows contain large stores of carbon deposited by vegetation and various natural processes over centuries. Now, these ecosystems sequester and store more carbon, often referred to as blue carbon, per unit area than terrestrial forest. Now, you get a new fact here, that actually the carbon captured by the aquatic ecosystem, the oceans and coastal ecosystems, is actually more than terrestrial forest. More in the sense, per unit area. Carbon captured by per unit area is more. So we can say the efficiency of capturing the carbon is more for the aquatic ecosystem than the terrestrial forest. All right, it can be asked maybe in the coming years, it can be asked. All right, let's move on to the next question. In the nature, which of the following is are most likely to be found surviving on a surface without soil? We have four options, four statements here, actually four organisms here, and we have to find that which of these organisms can survive, can be found in the nature surviving on the surface without soil. The keyword is without soil. Now, you should understand, you should know what a fern is, lichen is, moss is, mushroom is. I must say, it was a mediocre level question. All right. So fern are actually plants. They are flowerless plants. They are flowerless plants. As you can see this in the picture, they are flowerless plants, but they require soil. They actually require soil to grow. All right. So ferns are excluded. Let's come back to the question. If ferns are excluded, let's eliminate it. So option A and D are eliminated. We are left with B and C. So the option 2 is automatically correct. Always use this method to solve the questions, at least for prelims. All right, it is important to do this to save your time, because the aspirant who has studied hard the whole year, all right, now when you are attempting the paper, all right, when you are actually attempting the paper, then you should apply these techniques so that you can save your time and apply and utilize that time in solving some difficult questions which are difficult for you. Everyone has a different level. So according to that, whenever you feel that this is a difficult question, I have to invest more time here. How can you invest more time? Only then when you have actually saved time through this techniques. All right. So A, fern is taken out. So 2, lichen is automatically our answer. All right. And then we have to see the third is right or not, because fourth is excluded automatically. You can see. All right. So mushroom is excluded. So see, by knowing what fern is, we have excluded 2 options here. Also, we are only left with one organism to see that if it can survive without soil or not. So moss actually can survive without soil. They can be found on rock surface or on the tree barks. I'll show you the picture for moss. So you can see moss here. Mosses, they are non-flowering plants, all right, and plus they produce spores and have stems and leaves, but don't have true roots. That is, they do not require soil to survive. All right. And you can see mushrooms here. Mushrooms actually grow on an organic food source, or it can grow above ground or on the soil also. Generally, they are found on soil. We are left with lichen. We did not discuss lichen. So lichens are complex. We discussed that lichen is a combination. It's a symbiotic relationship of fungi and algae, right? And plus they can actually survive without soil. Generally, they are found without soil on the bare rocks or on the barks of the tree. All right, they are found where soil is not there, so they can survive without the soil. All right. So the correct answer here is C, because moss can also be found in nature without soil. So our answer is C, 2 and 3. All right, because fern and mushroom, they require soil to survive. Now let's move on to the next question. Let's see the next question. The vegetation of savanna consists of grassland with scattered small trees, but extensive areas have no trees. The forest development in such areas is generally kept in check by one or more or a combination of some conditions. Which of the following are such conditions? Now you can see there are 5 options, 5 statements here. All right, we have to choose which are the condition. Now to solve this question, I must say it was a mediocre question and a tricky one. First of all, you should know that savanna are grassland types. Also, it is mentioned here, consist of grasslands. All right. And one option you can easily, after seeing this, you can see that one option you have to choose, and you can easily choose fire here. because for the grasslands, all right, in grasslands, the trees and shrub, they do not grow much. That is, the forest development is not much because of fire. Fire plays a role of checking the development of forest, that is trees and shrubs. It favors grass. Fire always favors grass and not the big trees. And because see, big trees, they require time to grow, and also shrubs, but grasses, they actually grow very fast. That's why the fire, it plays a checking or a limiting agent. It acts as a limiting agent for the forest development, and it acts in favor of grasses. So in grassland, fire is one of the condition to check the development of forest. So we can see fire, and will by elimination method, let's see, we have eliminated 2, that B and D are eliminated. We are only left with A and C, that is 1 and 2 and 2, 3 and 4. So we see that first one is right or not. First one, or we can also see first one is right or not. Burrowing animals and termites. See, burrowing animals are the animals which actually dig holes in the ground and live in it. Right? They are known as burrowing animals. And termites, we have seen termites. All right. So burrowing animals and termites, they don't play any role in checking the forest development. All right. They actually, see, burrowing animals and termites, they actually loosen up the soil, and which actually increases the fertility, and it would actually benefit the development of forest, not check it. So first one is wrong. So we can arrive to the answer easily. The answer is C. Still, if we go by another approach, that is, if you don't apply this one, burrowing animals and termites, you have a confusion with that, we move on to the next one, because this is must. This is must. This is a basic knowledge that grasslands are checked by fire. So let's see the other options. Grazing herbivores. Grazing herbivores, actually, it acts as a limiting agent, because grazing herbivores, if they are grazing on a tremendous, if there are more grazing herbivores, then it would check the forest development. All right. So grazing herbivores is correct. Seasonal rainfall. This is also correct, because grassland, they do not receive much rainfall. If they receive much rainfall, then vegetative cover would be more. That is, forest development would be at a faster speed. All right. So yes, seasonal rainfall is also correct. Now soil properties. We are left with soil properties. All right. Students might feel a little bit confused with soil properties, but we have arrived to the question by this time, because 2, 3 and 4, the only option which gives the answer is C, right? But still, soil properties is not a limiting agent for the forest development in grassland areas. All right. So the answer is C. Let's move on to the next question. Now consider following statements. There are five statements here. Again, too many statements, so we can apply the elimination method. All right. So let's see the first statement. Moringa drumstick tree is a leguminous evergreen tree. You must have known the drumstick tree. See, let's see the figure. You might understand. You must have seen this tree somewhere near in the open spaces. You must have seen this tree, because it is found in India also. All right. It is found in India, and it is known as drumstick tree. Also, it is used extensively in cooking food and all. It is used as vegetable also. Also, the seeds, they are considered as superfood. All right. Research is being made on the seeds of drumstick, because they are the powerhouses. They actually give so much power when we actually intake these seeds. All right. In also, many medicinal properties are associated with this seeds. All right. So let's come back to the question. Moringa drumstick tree is a leguminous evergreen tree. Actually, yes, it is leguminous, but it is not evergreen. It is actually deciduous. It is deciduous tree. What is the difference between deciduous and evergreen tree? Deciduous tree, it sheds its leaf in a particular season, but the evergreen tree, it does not shed all its leaves in a particular season. That means it sheds its leaf. The green evergreen trees, they shed their leaves, but throughout the year, in little by little by little. So they do not have a particular time that at this time in this season we will shed all the tree, all the leaves. All right. So deciduous. This is the difference between deciduous trees and evergreen trees. All right. So this first statement is wrong. By elimination method, you can get the answer easily, but I think many of the students might have felt confused with this first statement. All right, if you take the elimination method through this one, you might arrive easily to the answer, because you see, you eliminate all the three options containing 1, so you get the answer B. But still, we come back to the answer, to the statements. We see the second statement. Tamarind tree is endemic to South Asia. Tamarind tree is endemic to South Asia. Actually, tamarind tree is not endemic to South Asia. It is endemic actually to other parts as well. What does endemic mean? Endemic means the tamarind tree is only found in South Asia, or basically it belongs to South Asia. But tamarind tree does not belong only to South Asia. It is also found in the parts of Africa, and it is found in all the tropical regions. So it can be in South America, in Africa, also in India. India is also a tropical country, so it can be found in all the tropical zone. It is found in the tropical zone, so it can be found in South America, Africa, and even South Asia. So this statement is wrong. This was an easy one. The second statement is a easy one. So by going by this term, let's see, we again come back to the option. All right, and we have not considered the first statement. All right, we take the other perspective that the second statement is wrong, and we go by elimination method. Then this is gone, this is gone. So we are left with only B and C. B and C. Also, you can see the common are 3 and 4 here. So 3 and 4 are automatically correct. All right, they are correct. Now we see the seeds of moringa and tamarind can be used in production of biofuels. Can be used in the production of biofuels. Is this statement right or wrong? Actually, this statement is right. The seeds of moringa and tamarind are used or can be used for the production of biofuels. For the production of biofuels. So we get to the answer, that is B. All right. Let's move on to the next question. You can see the tamarind tree here. In Hindi, it is known as imli. Imli ka ped. So tamarind tree is actually this one. All right. Let's move on to the next question. Also, these seeds, the drumstick seeds and tamarind, they are exported from India. Let's move on to the next question. This question can be included in geography. Can be included in the geography as well. The black cotton soil of India has been formed due to the weathering of the brown forest soil, fissure, volcanic rock, granite and schist, shale and limestone. So the black cotton soil, you know that it is found in the Deccan Plateau, and the Deccan Plateau is formed by lava rocks, and also the black cotton soil, it is formed by lava rocks. So lava rocks, which is the correct option here, the fissure volcanic rocks. Fissure volcanic rocks are also called lava rocks. So the fissure volcanic rock is only to confuse the candidates, right? It is similarly, it is also known as lava rocks. That is the rocks formed by the lava flow. When there is a volcanic eruption, the magma, which is inside the earth's crust, inside or below the earth's crust, in the mantle, it comes on the surface, and when the magma reaches the surface, it is known as lava. When the magma it reaches the surface, it is known as lava, and when it cools off, it forms rocks which are known as lava rocks. Also, it can be termed as fissure volcanic rocks, right? So black cotton soil is actually formed by these rocks, by the withering of these rocks. They get their chemical and all the physical properties from these parent rocks. Right? Let's move on to the next question. Now, which one of the following is used in preparing a natural mosquito repellent? Natural mosquito repellent. Our options are Congress grass, elephant grass, lemongrass, and nut grass. So basically, first of all, you know that mosquito bite, many diseases spread through mosquito bite, such as dengue, malaria, Zika virus. All right. So they spread through mosquito bite. Once a mosquito and mosquito carrying a virus, it bites a person, then he acquires that disease. So the basically only prevention is the method to be safe from such diseases. All right. So basically what the question is asking is the natural mosquito repellent, that is the product or the thing should be present in nature, should be present in nature. So all the four options, as we see, they are some type of grasses or a plant type. So this plant type, that means they are found in nature. All right. If we see the options, the correct answer is lemongrass. Actually, the correct answer is lemongrass. We'll discuss all the grasses because UPSC has a tendency to ask previous year questions many times. So they can in future ask questions based on these options. So we'll discuss them. First of all, let's see the plants that repel mosquitoes. These are the natural plants. Maybe in some few years or maybe next time the UPSC can give a combination of such plants or such plants that which are actually natural repellent, mosquito repellent. So we should know the other plants as well. You see the basil, in Hindi we call it tulsi, lavender, catnip, lemongrass, as there was in the option, marigold, lemon balm, rosemary, peppermint, mint, garlic, sage, and bee balm. Now these are the plants that repel mosquitoes and they are found in nature. All right. So they can be termed as natural mosquito repellents. All right. These are the important one. I would mark the important one which can come in exam: lavender, marigold, because these are the common names: rosemary, peppermint, mint, garlic. These are the common names. So UPSC can ask question based on them. Now let's see the options. First of all, the lemongrass. The lemongrass, it has a chemical named, it is also known as citronella grass. Citronella is a chemical present in the lemongrass. All right. This chemical actually repels the mosquito away from the person. This grass is also named by other names, as you can see: barbed wire grass, silky heads, cochin grass, Malabar grass, oily heads, or fever grass. All right. And plus C, citronella oil is produced from this lemongrass. Citronella oil, and that oil is applied on the skin to repel the mosquitoes. All right. It acts as a natural mosquito repellent. All right. Also, this citronella oil is used in insect sprays to keep away the insects from the house. Now let's move on to the next option, that was Congress grass. Now Congress grass, in India it is also known as carrot grass or gajar ghas. Gajar ghas or carrot grass. You can see the picture here. Now this is for lemongrass here, and the lower one is the carrot grass or Congress grass. You must have seen this in gardens or somewhere. All right, it grows as a weed. Generally, it has white flowers. Now let's move on to the next option, that was elephant grass. By the name, as the name suggests, these are actually huge grass. They grow tall, very tall, like 6 meters, 4 to 6 meters height. All right. So elephant grass, also known as Napier grass, elephant grass, or Uganda grass, is a species of perennial tropical grass native to African grasslands. All right. So this is native to actually African continent, and plus these can be used, this can also be grown in on uncultivated land to increase the green cover. Also they are used as animal feed, as animal feeds. Now next is nut grass. Now these are perennial weeds. All right, these are perennial weeds. They grow as weeds. You must have seen this nut grass in the gardens or open areas. All right, if they are unchecked, no one is cutting off the weeds, then they grow up in large quantity. All right. Now, this is nut grass here, and this is elephant grass. Let's move on to the next question. Now, consider the following kinds of organisms. There are 4 organisms here, and which of the above are primary producers in the food chain of oceans? In the food chain of the oceans. Now we have 4 options here. Let's discuss one by one. That is copepods, cyanobacteria, diatoms, and foraminifera. If we see the options, you just see the options, you might tick one automatically, that is cyanobacteria. They are also known as blue-green algae. Blue-green algae. So they are basically algae. So they are primary producers. First of all, you should know what is primary producers. The primary producers, they make their own food. They are known as primary producers. Basically plants. Basically plants containing chlorophyll, because through photosynthesis they make their own food, and then they pass on. Then the consumers, the primary consumers, they are the herbivores. They eat them, and they are known as primary consumers because they consume this. All right. Okay. So primary producers are the plants. They produce their own food. So cyanobacteria is the blue-green algae. It's a famous name. All right. So if we see that 2, we see the elimination by elimination method, we eliminate C and D. Only we are left with A and B. So in that way, 4 is automatically cancelled out. Foraminifera. All right. So we are left with diatoms and copepods. So diatoms also are photosynthetic. That is, they also come under plant kingdom, and they produce their own food through photosynthesis. So they are also primary producers. Copepods are not primary producers because they come under animal kingdom. All right, they are kind of animal kingdom. They come under animal kingdom. All right, so 2 and 3. So our answer is B. Now let's see the cyanobacteria. You must have seen this. You must have seen on the water bodies there is a layer of a green layer. All right, a green layer, thin layer. This is known as, these are actually known as cyanobacteria. All right, or blue-green algae. Because they are algae, automatically you understand that they produce their own food. So they can be termed as primary producers. Now diatoms are major group of algae. They are also algae, and by photosynthetic activity they produce their own food. All right, so they are primary food source for higher organisms. All right, so they are actually primary food producers. All right, actually they are microscopic in nature. You can see in the picture these are diatoms. All right, now as you can see here, copepods, they are actually small crustaceans. All right, crustaceans, you can see here, they are small crustaceans found in the aquatic ecosystem. All right, so they come under animal kingdom. Foraminifera, they are classified as zooplanktons. Zooplanktons, that means they also come under animal kingdom. That is, they are consumers, not producers. All right, and actually they are microscopic in nature and single cellular, generally found as single celled organism. All right, you can see here in the picture, you can see the total length is 500 micrometers. They are actually microscopic in nature. All right, let's move on to the next question. Now consider the following animals. There are 3 animals here, and the question is asking a special ability of the animals. Now, to reduce the chance of being captured by predators, which of the above organisms roll up and protects or protect its or their vulnerable parts? So basically they are asking that which of the above animals it actually rolls up, that is rolls up its body and makes up a protective covering so as to protect itself from the predators. So let's see one by one. Hedgehog, marmot, and pangolin. So you would easily understand if you see the picture. Now this is a hedgehog. You can see the hedgehog, all right. It has spines. You can see the spines here, all right. So generally these areas are delicate one, the leg and the mouth. So basically whenever it feels endangered by the presence of some predator around him, it actually rolls its body and protects itself. So hedgehog is correct. Now let's see the next. Now this is marmot. Now marmot is actually, it looks like squirrel, but bigger than that. It is a burrowing animal. All right. It actually digs the ground and lives under the ground, all right, generally in holes and all right. But you can see the body, it is covered with fur, not any protective shell or something. So they do not roll up to protect themselves. So marmot. And this is pangolin. It was in news. It has always stayed in news, right? You must have seen some news articles based on it, because it is been highly trafficked organism from China and other countries. It is highly trafficked, all right, and it is also considered as critically endangered species. Pangolin is a critically endangered species classified by IUCN as critically endangered. Now you can see it has scales here, and on the body you can see the scales, and whenever it feels endangered by the presence of predators, it rolls its body in this way and covers all its delicate part by the scales. So pangolin. Also we see the other organism status, right? It is also endangered, critically endangered. It is an critically endangered species, marmot. And hedgehog is least concerned, that means it is not endangered, all right. It is of least concern. Now let's come back to the answer. So hedgehog, yes. Marmot, no. Pangolin, yes. So 1 and 3, the answer is D. Also you must have the aspirants can easily solve this question if they were aware of current affairs, because in current affairs basically pangolin was in news many times there were articles based on this, that China is actually working on how to reduce the trafficking of pangolin, right? Now let's move on to the next question. Now with reference to water credit, consider the following statements. Now, basically there are 3 statements based on water credit, right? So let's see the statement 1. It puts microfinance tools to work in the water and sanitation sector. Second is, it is a global initiative launched under the aegis of World Health Organization and the World Bank. And the third is, it aims to enable the poor people to meet their water needs without depending on subsidies. Now we see the statements. Now we take the first statement. It puts microfinance tools to work in the water and sanitation sector. It is correct. So water credit is actually an initiative of water.org. It is an NGO. It's a global NGO. So it has come up with an initiative known as water credit. That is a microfinance tool. So they basically provide loans to the poor people, all right? So the poor people who cannot access the financial the mainstream finance from the banks and all right. So they provide microfinance means small loans, all right. So they are given small loans for basically water and sanitation purposes. So basically to make a toilet or to have a drinking pipeline to their home, so they can get microfinance and later on they can pay slowly they can pay. All right. So first statement is correct. All right, so we see by elimination method, B is eliminated because 1 is not there. All right, now let's move on to the second statement. It is a global initiative launched under the aegis of World Health Organization and World Bank. I told you in the first statement that water credit is an initiative of water.org. Water.org. So basically water.org is an NGO. It's a global NGO, and water credit is the initiative of water.org, not World Health Organization or World Bank. Actually, World Health Organization, World Bank, and UN and other major organizations, they are actually global partners for this initiative, water credit. All right, they are global partners. All right, so it's a difference. So many of the students might have felt confused by this, but it was a easy one if you know water credit. It is also from current affairs. All right, so second statement is wrong. Second statement is wrong because World Health Organization, it is not an initiative of World Health Organization or World Bank. If the statement was that World Health Organization and World Bank are global partners for this initiative, then the statement would have been correct. All right, so second statement is wrong, so we'll eliminate wherever 2 is there, and we arrive to the answer, that is 1 and 3, because we don't have to read the third statement for that purpose. But still we'll see, it aims to enable the poor people to meet their water needs without depending on subsidies. As we have discussed, it provides microfinance. All right, microfinance in the sector of water and sanitation, so the poor people, they can access the small loans, all right, to fulfill the water and sanitation purposes. All right, and they don't have to depend upon the subsidies. So this statement is correct. All right, so the answer is 1 and 3 only. Now you can see this is the logo for water.org, and it has come up with the initiative of water credit initiative. All right, see, it is a global initiative launched by water.org and global non-profit organization working to bring water and sanitation to the world. Water credit is a powerful solution and the first to put microfinance tools to work in the water and sanitation sector. Right? Let's move on to the next question. Now, in the context of India's preparation for climate smart agriculture, consider the following statements. There are 3 statements here. Let's discuss one by one. The climate smart village approach in India is a part of a project led by the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, an international research program. If we see, this is also from current affairs, basically from current affairs. Many of the questions are actually related to current affairs. Okay, and this one, I must say, it is a mediocre question because they have asked some technical part from here that, okay, the climate village approach is led by CCAFS, and then they have further asked about CCAFS, that how the project is carried on. So let's see the first statement. The first statement is correct. The climate smart village approach, all right, village approach is part of a project led by CCAFS, that is Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security. It is an international research program. All right, so this is correct. Actually, climate smart village, that means the approach is towards the rural areas. The villages should be climate smart. They should apply technologies in such way that is not harmful for the environment in the agricultural sector. All right, so it is actually it is an initiative of climate change and agriculture and food security. Now if we see, the first statement is correct, elimination method, B is gone. We see the second, the project of CCAFS is carried out under the consultative group on international agricultural research, that is CGIAR, headquartered in France. Now this statement is also right because all the function or the project is carried out under the consultative. This is the consultative group on international agricultural research, and it is headquartered in France. So the second statement is also correct. The third statement, if we take the second statement also, so we eliminate C here. All right. Now we are left with A, 1 and 2 only, and 1, 2, and 3. So we have to read the third statement. Now, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics, that is ICRISAT, ICRICSAT, in India is one of the CGIAR's research centers. This statement is also correct. This statement is also correct that International Crops Research Institute for Semi-Arid Tropics in India is one of the research center for CGIAR. All right. So this is also correct. So we arrive to the answer D, 1, 2, and 3. All right. Many a times the elimination method doesn't work. So it is not applicable always. So, but still you have to have it. You have to practice this so that in the exam you save your time. We have seen that many of the questions, they were easily solved by elimination method. All right. Okay, so we have arrived to the answer, that is 1, 2, and 3. All the three statements are correct. Now let's move on to the next question. Right, these are the logos for that. You can see ICRISAT, CCAFS, and CGIAR, and they are working in the field of to make agriculture sustainable. All right. So basically, it is connecting agricultural sector with climate change. So agriculture should not affect the climate adversely. All right. Now let's move on to the next question. Now, with reference to furnace oil, consider the following statements. There are three statements here. Now, furnace oil, we'll discuss on it. Furnace oil, what does it mean and all. All right. So we first see the statements. It is a product of oil refineries. Some industries use it to generate power. Some industries use it to generate power. Next, third statement is its use causes sulfur emission into environment. Now, basically, what is furnace oil? You understand first what is furnace oil. Furnace oil is also known as fuel oil. All right. It is a byproduct of distillation of petroleum. So petroleum distillation, we receive furnace oil out of petroleum distillation process. It is also known as heavy oil, marine fuel, furnace oil, and gas oil. All right. Now, actually, when petroleum is distilled, all right, so carbon black is the lowest grade. All right. Furnace oil is just above it during the distillation process. It is just above the carbon black. All right. Now let's see the properties of furnace oil. Now, fuel oil, also called furnace oil, fuel consisting mainly of residues from crude oil distillation. That means it is actually produced through distillation of oil, that is petroleum. Now next, also it is used as a backup fuel for peaking power plants. Whenever they have a shortage of natural gas or something, they don't have the supply, they have shortage of supply of natural gas, then as a main fuel, then it is used as a backup fuel to actually peak the power plants. So it is also used for power generation. And third, you can see due to sulfur content in the furnace oil, it causes sulfur emission into the environment. That is, it pollutes the environment with sulfur dioxide. Now let's see the statements. It is a product of oil refinery. Correct. Some industries use it to generate power. Correct. Its use cause sulfur emissions into environment. Correct. So the correct answer is D, 1, 2, and 3. All right. Let's move on to the next question. Now, with reference to New York Declaration on Forest, which of the following statements are correct? We have got 5 statements here. So basically, we'll use elimination method in such questions. As I told you, whenever you get 4 to 5 or more statements or options, then you have to use elimination method. It makes the answer, it makes the journey to get the answer easy and also fast. Now let's see the first, New York Declaration on Forest. Now, it was first endorsed at the United Nations Climate Summit in 2014. The first statement is correct, as New York Declaration on Forest were actually endorsed during the climate summit of 2014. All right, it was held in New York. United Nations Climate Summit in 2014. It was held in New York. All right, and that time they adopted New York Declaration on Forests. Right. So first statement is correct. Let's see, through elimination method we have eliminated C and D. So we are left with A and B. So our answer depends on the second statement. If we get the second statement correct or wrong, we'll arrive to the answer easily. We don't have to go for the other statements. So let's see the second statement. It endorses a global timeline to end the loss of forest. It is actually correct. It is actually correct. 2030 is the timeline they have endorsed. That 2030, by 2030 will increase the forest cover more than the area of India. So more than the area of India, they have an ambitious target that they would actually increase the forest cover, all right, around globally more than the area of India, all right, by 2030. So yeah, yes, there is a global timeline for it. So the second statement is correct. So we'll arrive to the answer. The answer is A. All right. Still, we'll see the other options as well. It is a legally binding international declaration. Actually, this statement is wrong because it is a voluntary declaration. Voluntary, that means any country can join it. And if any country doesn't want to join it, then it's okay. It is not legally binding. Legally binding means that all the targets are to be achieved. And if any country is not achieving the target, it would be punished accordingly. Now, so it is not, third statement is wrong. So the fourth statement, it is endorsed by governments, big companies, and indigenous communities. It is correct. So it is endorsed by governments, big companies, and indigenous communities. So fourth statement is correct. If you see the fifth statement, India was one of the signatories at its inception. This is a wrong statement because India did not sign it during its inception. Right? So our answer is A. 1, 2, and 4. Only 1, 2, and 4th statement are correct. Now let's move on to the next question. Before that, let's see New York Declaration on Forest. We have discussed this, by the way, but still, see, this New York Declaration on Forest was declared or launched at the UN Secretary General's Climate Summit in 2014. The New York Declaration on Forest outlines 10 ambitious, so you should also know 10 ambitious goals. Many times I told you that UPSC has a tendency to ask the questions again, but they won't ask straightforward question, but they would ask the question from around the information around that. So there were 10 ambitious global targets, all right, global targets to protect and restore forest and end natural forest loss by 2030. So timeline is endorsed, all right. The New York Declaration on Forest is a voluntary and non-binding international declaration to take action to halt global deforestation. All right. So let's move on to the next question. Now, magnetite particles suspected to cause neurodegenerative problems are generated as environmental pollutants from which of the following? So there are basically again 5 points here. So again, we can use the elimination method here. So magnetite particles. First of all, you should know magnetite. What is magnetite? Magnetite is an ore, or it's an iron ore. Magnetite, hematite. All right. So they are actually iron ore. All right. So magnetite, it has a magnetic properties. All right. Now these magnetite particles. All right. Generally, these particles are very small, nanoparticles. They actually reach the brain. If you accidentally or somehow it gets into your body, then it easily reaches the brain. And once it reaches the brain, it can cause neurodegenerative disease or problems like Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a neurological degenerative problem or a disease. It actually the memory losses The symptoms are memory losses and coordination problems. All right, Alzheimer is a dangerous disease and it is a neurodegenerative problem or disease. All right, so magnetite particles are associated with such problems. So what are the sources here? We have to find out what are the sources for magnetite particles. We'll go with first the brakes of motor vehicles. It is actually correct. Many times in the articles it was mentioned. All right, so actually magnetite particles, the maximum or the majority of the magnetite particles, they come from brakes of motor vehicles, from the drum brakes. So generally from brakes. So that's why the maximum magnetite particles are spread along the roads or the network of roads. So along the roads, magnetite particles are the quantity of magnetite particles is more. All right, due to this reason, that brakes of motor vehicles plus the engines of motor vehicles. So the 1 and 2 are correct. So let's find out and let's eliminate all the options which doesn't have 1 and 2. So only one option is eliminated. Now let's move on to the other options. If you see microwave stoves within homes. So microwave stoves actually releases electromagnetic radiations. It doesn't relieve particulate matter such as magnetite particles. All right. If it was asked about radiation, then okay, but it is asking about magnetite particles. So microwave stoves within home, they do not release any particulate matter such as magnetite particles. So third option is wrong. So let's eliminate wherever 3 is. So yes, we have arrived to the answer 1, 2 and 4. Also the power plants. The power plants also release magnetite particles. Telephone lines, no. All right. So only 1, 2 and 4, that is brakes of motor vehicles, engines of motor vehicles and power plants. All right. So here we have finished. So this was our discussion on environment and ecology section of UPSC Civil Services Prelims Examination 2021. Also, the rest of the subjects would be discussed by the other expert faculties. Also, you can access the videos, the video lectures on the detailed explanation in our YouTube channel. For that, please do subscribe our channel and click the bell icon so that all the videos, whatever videos we are uploading, you get the notification for that and you don't miss on any important session. I hope you liked this session. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, if you liked the session, and please do spread the message, the visionary idea of Prince Civil Services to all the relevant aspirants so that they can benefit from this program at maximum. On this note, I'll end my session here. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you. Have a great day.